Michelle, I like your background.
That's the boulevard in Gloucester. I thought I had saved one that was the Wenham Canal, but apparently it's not the right file type to do this. So
Where did I saw once before and then I couldn't find the way to do a virtual background. Where did you find it?
So down at the bottom of your screen where it says stop video, there's a little caret, an up arrow. If you click on that.
Oh, choose virtual background. I see it.
Yeah. So you can upload a picture there, or you can be in San Francisco if you'd like, or outer space. Okay. So I don't believe this is recording yet. I have this red dot blinking. Gene, are you still there?
I think he just left.
I muted him for a second, but okay. So Gene, what I see right now is a red blinking where it says recording. That means it's not recording, correct? Oops, just a second. You're on mute. Let's unmute you. Okay, what?
It should actually be recording.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I can pause the recording now until the meeting actually starts. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's what I will do. So I started the recording. So this is being recorded on Zoom and will be made available on HWCam in the near future. I'm going to try and pin. I'm now seeing somebody's phone. So let me see if I can fix this. Okay, there's that. So let me get back to pinning Mary Beth. Why can't I see you here? Okay.
Nice to meet you, Ms. Banios.
Very nice to meet you.
I would like to pin you as being on my screen as the main speaker. So, oh, you are pinned. Okay, so hopefully that will keep you there and that will be good. All right, so David, do you want me to lead this because I'm on this end, or do you want to be?
I could just get a start and then toss it over to you. So March 21st, 11:03 a.m. I'd like to just call the meeting to order. Excuse me. We are here, the Hamilton School Committee, to interview Mary Beth Banios. Banios, is that the pronounced correct? All right,
yeah.
Great. To interview for the role of superintendent. So I just want to point out that while this is open to the public to view, we are not taking comments from anyone not on the school committee. Excuse me. So I guess that's about it for me right now. Michelle, why don't you take it over? So I just want to say too that I'm going to be, might see me flipping back and forth. I apologize. Both of my printers decided to stop working this morning, so I have to do everything online. But because why would anything be easy this week?
Right. Super. So we had asked that you prepare an opening statement and gave some ideas of things we'd like to hear in that. That way we don't have to ask you those questions. So if you wanted to go ahead and start with your opening statement, that would be great. Thank you.
Great. So the first thing that I would want to say is thank you for making this meeting happen. I know all of us are dealing with some really interesting context right now. I know that about 2 weeks ago, it started with what's today's problem to be solved, and now the world is a little bit like what problem needs to be solved this hour. And so I thank everybody for pulling together and making this interview possible. I'd like to share with that as context, and knowing that we're all drinking from the fire hose right now, I hope to be articulate and be responsive to your questions. Certainly as a superintendent of schools, my primary focus right now has been getting the school in good shape and being sure that we're able to deliver services to students. There is some additional preparation I would have liked to have done for this meeting that it just simply was not possible. But again, my hope is that I can be responsive and articulate to any questions that you might ask. I did want to share just a little bit about my background quickly. I have experience as being a classroom teacher, instructional coach, assistant principal, principal, assistant superintendent, and superintendent, and would bring to this position 10 years of central office experience. What I would like to share with you from a personal perspective, I think a very reasonable question would be, why would you want to leave your position in Vermont? And there are a couple of compelling reasons for that. First and foremost is personal. My husband and I, when we became empty nesters, decided to make a bold move and head to Vermont, which we have loved for a long time. And we have thoroughly enjoyed it here. But there have been some challenges connecting to family and friends, and we have a son who is in college who is having a very hard time not being in his local community. So those personal reasons are the primary driver. My husband works in Massachusetts and is telecommuting. And we certainly, if things were to work out in Massachusetts, would continue to keep our home here as a summer home and make the transition down to Massachusetts. From a professional perspective, I have been working in the Windsor Central Supervisory Union for 3 years now. When I came there, that is a district that is taking many towns and merging them together. And one of the things they were looking for is a leader that could help build a common vision. And that work has been completed in the district. The 7th town just voted to voluntarily merge with our district this past December. The work, I believe, in this district is now shifting to more governance-related, legal-related, policy-related, as this nascent district, this nascent board figures out the best structures to operate under. Again, the district is now a year and a half old, and there are many challenges that are coming up in that area. And certainly that is something that I would feel comfortable working through, but given the change in focus, this feels like an appropriate place to potentially move on and have somebody that has deeper skills in those areas come on board. In terms of why I do this work and what are the compelling reasons that I show up to work every day, there are really 2 big ones that I want to speak to. The first is that I believe there is really a compelling need in public education to rethink what are the skills and dispositions students need to graduate with. The world is changing rapidly. The skills and competencies that students need in order to be successful in that world are evolving. And our public institutions that prepare students for that world need to evolve along with it. And while I see many independent schools starting to do some really excellent work in this area, public schools seem to be lagging and trying to figure out, what does this look like? I am very interested in being engaged in this conversation. I think it's critically important for students so that they are prepared for what the world is going to ask of them. And I think it is a national question as well. Finally, what I would like to offer is that, kind of my theory of action in terms of how the important work of schools get done so that we can serve the students under our care. And what I would share with you is my theory of action is the only way this gets done is with strong team building, that those teams are united around a central vision. By teams, I mean parents, I mean students, I mean teachers, board members, community representatives, selectmen, state senators, state representatives. All of us have to be rowing in the same direction. The problems and challenges that are facing public education are significant, and there is no way that those problems are going to get solved unless we work together to make that happen. So that is the introductory statement that I had prepared for you. And now, true confessions. I know you shared that you sent me a couple of things that you wanted me to touch base on, and I have to share that in the craziness of all of this, I missed that. So if there is anything that you wanted me to speak to in my introductory statement that I have not, I'd be happy to address it at this time.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that you might not have missed it. It's possible that it wasn't shared with you. So, as you can imagine, it's been busy on our end as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
flexibility is key right now.
Yeah. So, the first question is going to be from the school committee chair, David Polito. So, if he wants to unmute, he is unmuted and he can ask the question.
So yeah, great. I think that you actually touched on a lot of the things that we had hoped you would touch upon in the opening statement. So, excuse me. At this point, we'd just like you to describe a program that you've developed, implemented, or worked in that created value for students while controlling, budgetary costs.
Sure. So let me give some thought to that, and I'm going to jump into my share mode here. So I will. I think the program that I'll speak to is this question of how we build innovation, how we build learning environments that start to address the skills and challenges that skills and competencies that students need in order to be successful. So some of the ways in which we started to do that, I will start with a piece where we sent individuals out into what we would call an innovation and learning study group. And in this study group, we sent teams of teachers and board members and administrators and students. And we used title money, so grant money, and we actually sent a team out to the West Coast and a team out to the East Coast. There were no locally appropriated dollars spent on this. You can see here, these are the study group members. It was a fairly significant group. And this group went out and spend time in spaces that have been recognized for their innovation and their work that they are doing with students. We blogged about it. We created this document so that everybody back in the district could understand what it was that we were learning about these types of environments. Then one of the things that we worked with, let me just get out of here. Just shift back out for a sec. Then one of the things that we did is that what happened with that work is once we started to build capacity within our team, our teachers started to do some really remarkable work on their own. And my experience has been that's how good things grow. So what I would give you as an example of that is that some of the teachers that went on that trip and a couple of other ones that we sent a team out to Olin College, we sent a team out to High Tech High. Again, no local funds were utilized. We were able to utilize our title funds for this. But here's what starts to happen, I think, when you do that kind of work. A group of teachers went and developed what's called a teacher toolkit around how we realize the portrait of a graduate outcomes. This is an intensive document with lots of really practical strategies for teachers, links to different ways to get started. All of this was built by our teachers. It cost us absolutely nothing. Then the teachers said, okay, we've built out this document and we're going to volunteer to start hosting workshops for any of our colleagues that want to come and walk through this document with us and start to learn about this work that we're doing.
Mary, can I just interrupt you real quickly? I just want you to know that when you're clicking on links, it's
Yeah.
not automatically sharing that to us. We still see your HW interview document. So I don't, like the screen share, I don't think knows to jump from screen to screen.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Because that will not be helpful if that happens. If you give me 1 second in the idea of rapid prototyping, let me just see if I can make that shift. Can you now see my
Your
internet
Google Drive,
browser?
yes.
You got it. Okay, so let's try this again. Very quickly. I'll back up very fast so that you can see. So can you see this now? Okay. So this is the teacher toolkit that was developed by one of our teachers. And not one, it was actually a team of teachers. You can see all the links, all the professional development. So this is really high quality professional development that's delivered in our district by colleagues. These are colleagues that are working with each other in classrooms right next to each other. So the likelihood that this is going to make a difference in classrooms when somebody can just pop over and say, I have a question about what it was that you developed is extremely high. And again, this was developed at absolutely no cost to the district. Then what I shared first, and you may have missed it while we were working through some of these technology glitches, we sent that team out to look at innovative environments. These are the kinds of documents that we created internally so that we could spread the word about what it was that we were seeing. Our members of our team were blogging. We created this document to say, here are some things that we see that we think would be really valuable for students. Then what I wanted to offer to you is that this would be an example of something that recently happened. Just pull that up. We, for our in-service day this year, we had a POG is Me conference, which a Portrait of Graduate is Me conference. You can see that the presentation of these topics was done by the enthusiastic, talented, and inspiring teachers and administrators of our district. So that our teachers were the presenters around the different aspects of this day. And it was incredibly well received by our faculty. And just to give you a sense, and I can just show you some of the session overviews that we engaged in. But you can just, as I scroll through, start to see some of the sessions that people were offering. I would have to say that, been to a lot of conferences, the quality of these presentations were outstanding and as good as any as you would have seen in an expensive conference that you would pay for. So this is some examples of work around how we're moving the question of deeper learning and innovation forward, not utilizing appropriated funds, and providing high quality professional development at low to minimal costs, utilizing the strategy of building capacity in our teachers and then having them be the leaders of this work.
The next question is by Stacy Metternich, and I think I heard her voice, but I don't see her name. Stacy, are you here?
Yep, I am.
Great, it's your turn.
Hi there. So can you tell us about an experience you may have planning and renovating or building a school and athletic facilities, or how you might approach the critical issues that it might bring?
Sure. So I have a fair amount of experience with MSBA, and let me just pull this up as I'm speaking. So when I was in Shrewsbury, we were, when I arrived there, a building project was underway, and when I was leaving, we were launching a second one. So I noticed in some of your documents that you've already presented a statement of interest to MSBA for one of your elementary schools. So that's a process that I have familiarity with. In our current district, we are dealing with a number of different facility issues, and we are now about 2 years into master planning new build project for the middle school, high school. Unfortunately, Vermont is in a different place than Massachusetts. There is no state level reimbursement. And so the funding of this is continuing to evolve and be challenging because there is a limit to what we are going to be able to pass on to our taxpayers. To give you a sense of some of the work that we've done to date, we had an extensive facilities assessment done to be able to have a sense, is this going to be a renovation or is this going to be a new build? To be able to be articulate with our community about what the issues are with the building. We have been hosting building tours for probably 3 or 4 months now, where we're bringing folks through and letting them see some of the structural challenges that are there, and being able to give people the opportunity to ask and explain why the analysis has been that it is a new build and not a renovation. So that's one step in that process. We also spend time in terms of building out a educational visioning document. So if we're going to go forward with a new build, what do we believe that learning environments need to look like? And that has certainly impacted the design of the school that we have been developing. And then, you know, as we go through the process, we now have a leadership team who is making the final revisions to the plan. We are working with state level officials because this particular build will be right by the river, which will be absolutely beautiful, but also we have to pay a lot of attention to statewide regulations about construction that are near river areas, wetland areas, that type of thing. So we are continuing on this process. And again, I have a fair amount of experience having worked in Shrewsbury. Again, during my tenure, one building was under construction and completed, and a second building had been started under the MSBA process.
Great. Our next question is from Jean Lee.
Hi, Mary Beth.
Good morning.
My question is, how would you ascertain the public's perception of the school system? And then reality and perception often differ. So then how would you then address misperceptions if in your analysis it doesn't match reality?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts around that. First thing that, again, I would offer, and just checking, can people see documents as I'm putting them up now? Is that working, or is that distracting?
Well, you don't have it yet. You need to be able, you have to share each document.
All right, so can you see this one now?
Nope, you're going to have to probably hit share.
There we go. I thought I had shared every link so that it would work.
You took the share off, so you need to go back to share again.
All right. I thought my skill set was developing, but clearly it needs some more work. Let me see.
Stacy's a professional Zoom person. She's been doing this for years, so just learn.
I wouldn't say professional. I just use it all the time, and it just takes a little bit of time. There you go.
Oh, there it is.
There we go. Oh, did you miss our renderings of our new build? Oh, that's too bad.
Nice.
All right. So anyways, what we have here is kind of how I started my entry into the Windsor Central Supervisory Union. I built out this entry plan after having multiple one-to-one interviews with folks, looking at document reviews, going through data that was related to the district, and then compiling what it was that I heard in this study. What were people saying to me? I sent out a survey to everybody in the district, to teachers in the district, and I was able to report back to the board, here's what I learned when I did that. And that initially, based on that, here's where I think I can be most valuable in terms of some initial focus. And that was something that I shared with the board, and the board was comfortable with where that started. Then where we moved is to start talking about how we get the community involved. And one of the ways that we did that was related, when we were building out our strategic plan, we had some steps along the way that were related to SWOT analysis. So in the SWOT analysis, we did a document review for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But then we also pulled together our strategic planning design team, and we did a perception-based SWOT. We said, tell us, what it is that you think is out, not based on any evidence. What's the word on the street about our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and threats? And we then merged those two documents in terms of a database SWOT and a perception-based SWOT as we identified the critical areas to start to tackle in our strategic plan. So those are a couple thoughts about how that might be handled.
Michelle,
you're
you're on mute.
Yeah, but is Michelle Horrigan on?
I'm here. I'm here. Yep. Hi,
The-
everyone. I apologize. Yep. Mary Beth, I apologize for not being here at the start of your interview. I'm glad to see, I met you briefly when you came down to your initial, and I'm glad to see you made it back to Vermont in one piece. I was concerned about your late night driving, but I'm glad you're here. So welcome. Can you please tell us about a time that you had to ask for help and how it helped you grow as an educator and or administrator?
Sure. And I would probably use most recent examples. One, in this role, there are daily issues that pop up and you say, I wonder how I should handle this one. So I have two networks that I utilize. One that has been an incredible strength for me is let me just stop that for a sec, is work with a mentor. I had an opportunity to talk to the Vermont Superintendents Association. I asked for recommendations. I interviewed 3 different people, and I hit the jackpot with my mentor. She is actually also the president of the Vermont Superintendents Association. So I kiddingly say, hey, time to phone a friend. So Jean, here I am again, phoning a friend to get some guidance around issues that pop up that either it's just a really complex problem and I need a thought partner, or that this is something that I have not yet done yet, and I know Jean's done it 100 times, so I reach out to her and she is really helpful around giving me guidance in terms of how to approach something. The second piece, certainly these past couple weeks with the coronavirus has been challenging and problems that nobody knows the answer in terms of how to solve. So we have a regional superintendents group that has a conference call. This week it was daily around what are the issues that you're finding. We're under governor's orders, emergency orders. We have to set up things, food delivery, childcare. We need remote learning set up by Monday. What are you doing? What are the problems that are happening? What are the personnel issues that are coming up? What are the logistical issues that are coming up? So being able to connect to that group, we're all sharing documents back and forth. Hey, I just created this one for our district, and we're sharing so that it enables us to get smarter fast together. So those are a couple examples of when I've needed help and how I go about getting it.
Thank you.
The next question is from Ty. So if Ty wants to ask a question.
Ty, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself, Ty.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. How would you develop the district budget proposal, whose input would you solicit? And what is your history working with municipal officials, like a town manager, board of selectmen, and finance committees?
Sure. So, one of the things that I would start with is that budgets are challenging everywhere. And good decisions start with kind of confronting the cold hard facts around what that is. And that the process starts early on. And what I would offer as an umbrella statement is that what is happening in Windsor Central right now, given this merger and new budgets and new structures coming together, is very, very different than the budget scenario I worked in Shrewsbury, which was a very well-refined budget. So basically the way that started was that there was a calendar document that was created giving approximate dates and times and sometimes specific dates and times over the course of a year in terms of what was going to happen to get to the targeted town meeting day. It started with a meeting with the board to identify priorities and assumptions. So as the district starts to build out the budget, what are the priorities the board wants us to consider, and what are the assumptions that we should be making as we build the budget? So for example, what are we going to assume in terms of level funding? What are we going to assume in terms of percentage of circuit breaker and all that different type of thing? Then the district gets started. They're making projections around moving forward our contractual obligations. We're looking at any impact in terms of contracts that are out there that need to be paid attention to. We need to make projections about what we're anticipating getting in terms of circuit breaker funds. So all that work starts happening behind the scenes. Really prior to the governor's announcement in terms of his or her budget. Then about the same time that the governor is releasing his or her budget at the state level, we're releasing our initial budget proposal that is reflective of what the district needs to operate and do its job well. At the same time, there is work being done with selectmen around what is going to be in the town managers in terms of what's going to be possible for the towns to bear in terms of an increase. Those conversations are occurring. There is communication back and forth. And around in Shrewsbury, the town meeting was April-May timeframe. So this is probably happening February, March, looking at getting direction about where the budget needs to come in order to be viable for the community. And oftentimes, at least when I was in Shrewsbury, the number that was viable and the number that was needed, there was a discrepancy. So that meant that we had to go to work and start figuring out how we look at these issues. Number of different people are feeding into that. Heavy reliance on the school leadership team that is also obviously in strong communication with teachers and knowing what's working, what the challenges are, all those different pieces. So coming back with proposals to the board, and in Shrewsbury we used a board workshop model where we would have meetings, open meetings, but workshops where the board and central office leadership would sit down and say, okay, here's where we think we're going to need to go in terms of reductions. Board would give their input as to what seemed to work for them from a community perspective. There was also a meeting with the finance committee, selectmen, prior to this budget being finalized, so that those groups were getting together and talking and sharing with one another the different challenges that each entity was facing. And then ultimately the board voted on a budget that was in alignment with what the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee had indicated was possible. And so it was again, people working together, respecting the fact that there are a lot of different lenses that need to be honored and considered when building a budget, so that when we got to town meeting, there was broad support across all stakeholders that this was the budget number that was making sense.
Great. So the next question comes from Peter. Peter, can you ask your question?
Hi, sorry, I was taking notes. Good morning, Superintendent Banios. My name is
morning.
Pete Balzac. Good morning. I'm a teacher. I was teaching in the district for 4 years. Could you describe for us what the teaching and learning environment might look like in our district 5 or 10 years from now?
Yeah. Interesting question. I think I'd probably have a lot of questions that I'd want to ask around that, but here's some thoughts that I would offer. Initially, I would say that, what is the agreed upon outcome of where people want to head, what the communities think the education and instruction should look like. So if I will again pop on here. Tell me how I'm doing if you're able to see this.
Not yet.
Not yet. Let's see.
Try hitting, yep, there you go.
There you
Did that
go.
pop up? There we go. All right. So part of the process in terms of what teaching and learning looks like in a district is to get really clear about what the outcomes are that we want. So the process of building those outcomes, I would say, is created with teachers, with administrators, with parents, with community members, and with students around what is it that we want to see in terms of outcomes. And then in 5 years from now, the question is, where are we now? And what would it actually take to get us to a point where we could graduate students that are well-versed in these skills and dispositions? And that's where the strategic plan comes in, to say, what do we need to do to move this? And start to build out strategies for getting to this particular location. So what it looks like 4 to 5 years from now depends on what it is the community decides is the target. And then working together to figure out the map for how we're going to get there. That being said, I know you folks have a portrait of a graduate in place, and that's something that is certainly driving my interest in Hamilton Wenham. You're clearly engaged in this work already with strategic planning. There are some things that you almost always see in portraits of a graduate once people take a deep dive in and start looking at what are the skills that students need to be successful in a 21st century world. Critical thinking and problem solving is almost always there. Some type of communication is almost always there. Self-direction, I think yours is resilience, is almost there, almost always there. Some connection to being able to be a citizen in the world, and in our area, the word that the group felt most comfortable with was this concept of stewardship. So those are some of the things that I think when you start looking at kind of the general consensus. There are many, many districts that are engaged in this work right now. I work very closely with Ed Leader 21. That is a primary driver of this work. I have seen hundreds of Portrait of a Graduate statements, and those are the types of things that are fairly consistent, because we know what it is that students need to be able to do once we start digging into what's being asked of students in this new environment.
Thank you.
So the next question is for Michelle Bailey, which is me. So I'll go ahead and ask it. How do you manage dissent and alternate opinions as a senior leader in the school district? And can you give us an example of when you have changed your mind on something?
Sure. Let me just think that through a little bit.
And so the first part of the question is, how do you
Yes,
manage
yeah,
dissent?
no, I was just
And
trying
the
to think of a good example.
Yep. And then the
Um,
second part is about giving the example of when you've changed your mind on something.
Yes. So in terms of dissent, I would argue when I first came to Windsor Central Supervisory Union, there had been some challenges around their leadership team. And so we dug right in. We utilized the book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And we started looking at what does an effective team look like when they're making really solid decisions. And one of the components of an incredibly effective team is the fact that there is really healthy, robust debate, that people come to a meeting and they don't hold back in terms of what it is that I think the right decision is. And creating a culture in which that becomes a safe thing to do, I think is really critical in terms of the superintendent's leadership role. That's an example in a leadership team, but that's true for all groups, right? Does the board have a place where there can be robust, healthy disagreement? Is that, how is that working between town managers and selectmen? How does that work with teachers and principals and schools? Because when you can safely unpack and challenge all different types of thinking around a decision, the likelihood that you're going to get the best decision goes up immensely. So I would say that first question about how do you handle disagreements is that you work on that culture and where that is expected. Thank you for that perspective. And then at the same time, the other part of that culture is we're going to debate this, we're going to unpack this, and in the end, we are going to make a decision and everyone is going to pull behind it because we've done the absolute best that we can, we've got the best decision that we possibly can, and we're going to need everybody to row in the same direction. So it's that cultural work of setting up an environment in which that's how people approach challenging issues. I think in terms of a time where I had changed my mind, we have a situation in Windsor Central right now where when the merged district opened, I think a day before or 2 days before schools were supposed to start, we had a primary school that had had moisture issues over the summer, had done a deep clean, did air quality testings. The air quality tests came back several days before school opened with mold counts in the 200,000s. We had to immediately, we could not open the school, and that building has been sitting empty while the board and the district figures out what to do about that. The board had asked me to give my recommendation about how we should use that. Knowing the financial situation in the district, we were able to move all the students over to another school and accommodate them given the space in that school. Really significant financial challenges in the district, so my recommendations were related to things that we could do that would not add any cost to the budget and it actually would present some revenue. The people in the town of Pomfret were very, very upset about that they felt that this has to be returned as a school. You're not understanding our needs. Our kids need to be back there. And there was incredible emotion related to that. So, I pulled back, board pulled back and said, you know what, this is not the time for that. We need to set up a more comprehensive study where we pull people together and we unpack this question and we build some level of a consensus around it. But the level of angst and concern, clearly it needed more processing, and so we immediately backed off.
Great. The next question is from Ty.
Hi. What role do you see a superintendent playing in developing a district culture? And I think you just spoke to some of that. And what would that culture be?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things, for me, I find there's a couple phrases that I use a lot. So I'll share those with you. First is crew, not passengers. You know, that we are looking to have everybody in our district be crew. The challenges are too complex. The problems that we need to face and solve come up every day, and there is no room for anybody in the district that says, here's a problem, who do I bring it to so that they can solve it? The way that we solve problems here is that, oh, there's a problem. I think I have an idea of how to solve it. Let me try this. What team is going to work on this? But it is, you know, working and fostering and building this concept of crew, not passengers is really, really critical. Next piece I would offer, you know, the people probably get tired of me saying, is hard on the issues, soft on the people. That we know that there are complex, difficult, messy problems that are facing, you know, and certainly the level of complexity right now in our district with bringing 7 towns together, towns being worried that their small schools are going to close. These are emotional, hard problems. And in a difficult financial environment, when those problems get too big, too hard to see a pathway forward, oftentimes the very human tendency is to start to get angry with somebody that has a different perspective than yours, and that perspective is making this problem harder. And so the focus shifts off of the problem to starting to blame somebody else. And when that happens, as an organization, we have to be able to label it. Ooh, look what just happened. We're going in that direction. That's not going to help us solve this problem. And to be really mindful when it happens, to be understanding of that and empathetic towards it. This is hard. We all want to bail. You know, that's an easy solution to start to just get mad at somebody else. But to develop the discipline to identify when that is happening and to bring yourself back and keep the focus on the messy, complex problem. So that's work that has to happen. And then I do think that the role of superintendent is keeper of the culture. I would offer that in these messy, complex challenges, you know, in particularly around budget development and in terms of, I would say primarily related to fiscal issues, with some staff members that felt that certain things should be advocated for. I personally received a couple communications from staff that were not respectful. And for people that were real, and I knew that they were frustrated. We had spent time together, but they had interpreted something in a particular way that wasn't the way it was intended. But the communication to me was not respectful. And so that, as a keeper of a culture perspective, you know, part of that job, and I had known also that some of these individuals had spoken to other folks in a way that just their frustrations were showing. So being able to sit down with them and say, look, you know, we acknowledge that things are hard. We understand your perspective. We wish that we had the opportunity to make things, you know, to go down a path that would feel more comfortable for you. You have been heard and your perspective is valued. But when you communicate around your perspective, we need to hold the line around what that communication sounds like and the tone in which it's delivered. And I feel that I have positioned myself in such a way that I can say to those individuals, I would never, ever send you a communication like this, because that is who we are as a district, and I'm asking that you honor and not send me or any of your colleagues a communication like that. And that's it. And again, these are good people, you know, people definitely got it, but I do think that part of the role of superintendent is when we see things happening that break with our culture and our values, that the superintendent is certainly somebody that needs to have difficult conversations with people and ensure that those values are upheld as a culture.
Great.
Great. Jean has the next question, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
So what role do you believe the staff should play in decision-making for the district? And then from your experience, what is the most effective way to involve your staff in the decision-making process?
Yeah. So first of all, teacher leadership, staff decision making, I would say is a critical component to being able to get good decisions. I'll share. Let's see. Pull this up. See if I can do this again. Wait for it. So this is something that we just recently were building out in our district, because we had some work to do related to our math outcomes and curriculum. So what we did here, as you can see at the top, is that we have math, what we call curriculum instruction and assessment development teams, draft essential agreements. So that's a cohort of coaches, some teacher feedback, and some administrative feedback. And we talk about what are the essential agreements in terms of delivering this curriculum that we all agree to. And again, then there's more robust feedback back and forth with teachers and administrators on the draft. Then those drafts, and so for example, if they're being developed at the elementary level, they then move on to the K-12 math leadership team for review. So that team is made up of, K-12 math teachers, special education, administrators, coaches, and they're looking for alignment. How is this all playing out? Is what we're doing here making sense across the district? And then as a K-12 math leadership team, they formally adopt the essential agreements. And then that K-12 math leadership team, which is, again, has lots of teacher voice on that, says, okay, if we agree to this, and these are the pacing guides that we agree to, these are the instructional approaches we agree to, here's what we're going to need in terms of professional development in order to make that happen. And so that there's that collective responsibility for the work. To the right-hand side, you see that all of this is grounded in data, so that as these teams are making decisions, it's not something that is just, here's my personal opinion, but here's what the data is telling us. So that would be an example of how teachers would be involved in decision making.
The next one is for Michelle Bailey, which is me. So describe a time you've led a team that was reluctant to be led. How did you help overcome the reluctance, and what were the results? And what could you have done differently?
Yeah. So I think in terms of reluctant teams, there's a number of different approaches, and I will tell you that this is something that I think I've gotten better with over the course of my career. Earlier on as an administrator, I think my approach was, okay, here's where we really need to head, let's go, and didn't always pay attention at the level that I needed to. Is there, have we got people coming along? I've shared this phrase, but it's another one that kind of guides me, is that if you're leading and nobody's following, you're just out for a walk, right? So that ability to be able to pull people along and build consensus is really critical. And listening and figuring out what are the obstacles is an important element. I'll give you an example. When I was in Shrewsbury, had a thought about how we move our professional development to be more in alignment related to deeper learning. And basically it involved building out some online central resources related to topics aligned with our Portrait of a Graduate, and having people be self-directed in their professional development, and then sharing out in a celebration of learning at the end of the year. And there were some folks that were, that sounds awesome. And there were a lot of folks that said, I can see a whole bunch of problems with that. And what I would share related to that is, because we took the time to listen to the people that said, we see a whole bunch of problems with it. They were right. There were all kinds of technical issues that had we not thought of those before we launched it, it would not have been pretty. And so we pull people together in teams, tell us what you're thinking, what's this going to mean for your department? Okay, we hear this, we've got this idea for how to solve it. So one of the things I reflect upon of that, at the time, there were days where I was frustrated, like, oh, come on, let's just do this. It'll be okay. But because people kept pushing and because they kept saying, no, you've got to think about this. And you know, I had the, you know, good decision making, I think, in the end, to listen to what it was that they were saying. That when we actually got to the point where we launched it, it was a pretty significant cultural shift in terms of what professional development looked like, and it went pretty well. And all the problems or all the questions that our teachers had about it came up in these vetting groups, so that we, you know, it wasn't 100%, you know, there were certainly still some things that we missed, but we caught a lot of it because, you know, the time was taken to listen to people that see things from different perspectives, with boots on the ground, that can project what's going to happen if you don't pay attention to this. And listening to those voices, you know, not listening to that, you do at your own peril.
All right, so we've got 2 more questions left, so we're doing pretty well on timing. So the next question is from David.
Michelle, I only see you on my screen. I don't have a gallery view anymore.
Maybe you were on speaker view. Go ahead and click on that, David. But on the recording, all we are seeing really is Mary Beth anyway. So.
All right. As long as that's good on your, because yeah, you popped up on my screen too, Michelle. Excuse me. So, Mary Beth, Hamilton-Wenham is a very competitive academic district. Excuse me. You know, the downside is that this leads to increased social emotional needs of our students. I'd like to hear your thoughts on policies and procedures that could alleviate some of the stressors that are burdening the students while continuing to have high academic standards throughout the district. How would you care for the emotional well-being of our district?
Thank you. Great question. And I would say that that's a question that is not just limited to Hamilton-Wenham. The social emotional needs of students is a remarkable question that's coming up everywhere. So a couple of thoughts around that. And, you know, one of the things that I do think is important around this is a sense of student engagement in the work, right? That it is not so much a credential-based learning environment as it is a learning environment where students are engaged in meaningful, authentic learning that they get up in the morning and want to do and get to do and help them feel connected to the larger world. So I think that instruction matters in this. And again, student engagement is really critical related to that. So that's one thought. The next thought is around what are the structures and supports that we put in place to help students manage the incredible influx of challenges, expectations that are put upon them. And there are a variety of strategies. One of the ones that is often used right now is helping students develop the skills around mindfulness. When I was in Shrewsbury, our office was actually right next door for the UMass Center for Mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn was there. And developing that skill set. And I would offer around that it's not just a question of developing student skill set in that, it's a question of developing teachers' skill set in that. Because when we're thinking about managing stress and being present to do the work, if teachers are at a place where they are feeling overwhelmed and they've got a lot coming at them, they also need that capacity to be able to, you know, be mindful, to focus for a moment on being present. Because when stressed kids come into classrooms where stressed teachers are having a hard time being present, that's not a helpful dynamic. So I think part of it again is that not just for the students, but how do you build a culture in which we pay attention to our ability to be present in the moment. So that would be another piece to that. There is certainly some work that can be done related to trauma-informed practice. We're doing some work with that in our district right now. Connection pieces, one of the things that is a reality, I think, looking at digital environments, and while digital tools can be remarkably powerful in terms of networking with kids and production and curation, they can also be a challenge in terms of real solid connections. So what are our policies related to digital devices? What's our work in helping kids figure out how that gets managed in a way that's helpful and healthy? That's an approach that I think is important to take as well. Looking at what are the extracurricular activities that are available to students, from being sure that there's enough physical exercise to opportunities to have students see success. People have different ranges of talents and skills, and those get highlighted in different environments. Does everybody have a place where they feel a level of success? And I think probably the final piece that I would offer related to that is the idea that every student should come to school feeling clear about who is an adult in that school that I can go to, that I have a trusted adult that I know is there for me. Because that piece, that adult connection, is really critical. In Shrewsbury, one of the things that we did is we had 3 levels of surveys, an early elementary, intermediate elementary, and a secondary survey in which we asked every single student in the school, can you identify an adult to help you? And for those students who said that they could not, they rose to the top of our list around, we need to reach out to them. We need to be sure that they're feeling connected. So that human connection, that sense of presence, again, I think it's a cultural piece and needs careful care. It needs to be built with intention.
So the last question from the committee is going to come from Stacy, and then we'll allow you to ask us questions and then have you do a closing statement.
Hi again. I know we've gotten some information regarding this theme throughout this whole time we've been together, but describe your leadership philosophy and how you would build leadership capacity at the school and district level.
Yeah, so my leadership philosophy, and I spoke to that kind of at the outset of this, is that the way that you get things done is by building strong, effective teams that work in a system where there is clarity around where we're going. So that's it in a nutshell. That's my theory of action. How do you build those teams, and how do you build that capacity? Being sure that you're identifying people that are willing to step forward as leaders, and that is, I certainly include that group outside of an administrative leadership team. We have some remarkable teacher leaders that are moving things forward in ways that we could never ever do. People in the community, board members that are leaders. So part of what I think this job entails is looking around to see who's stepping up, who are the informal leaders in the district, and invest heavily in them, support them heavily. What is it you need? How can I help you? And what I see is then when you start to you build out those cohorts of informal leaders, now you've got, 10, 20, 25 people out there that are all moving forward, that are all leading. And when you get that level of, and that number of people doing that work, powerful things start to happen really quickly. And that's, and one of the things that excites me the most about this work is when the moment in which you start to see that happening. And so an example I would give is that when I'm on site visits, I'll enter a school and I'll have a teacher, oh, come here, let me show you what I just did. Or a principal will say, oh, the faculty just did this. And you start to see, and you go to all these different locations and everybody is doing something amazing because they are owning it. And there are critical people in those buildings that have stepped up to lead it. So my leadership philosophy is that, what do I do to help build that in the culture? How do I support people? Because the work is going to get done. Kids are going to get what they need far more quickly, in a far better way, if we identify the leaders that can all go out there. And quite frankly, the more leaders, the better.
Great. Okay, so we are at a point where you can now ask us questions, and that's going to be a teeny bit more difficult because we're going to have to figure out the order. So just all of us, if we can just, if you hear somebody talking, don't talk over them, but we'll all get a turn to answer if we need to. So why don't you go ahead and ask us any questions you'd like to know about the Hamilton Wenham.
Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity. One of the first questions that I have that I'm sure will not be surprising is, what do you see as the board, as the critical work ahead of the Hamilton Wenham School District?
I don't mind jumping in on that one to start out. I think right now we are kind of, I don't want to say we're quite a rudderless ship, because I think that the community and the teachers and the administration have a vision of where they would like to go. Just with the transition in leadership over the past couple of years, we don't have a sort of solid direction. And I think sort of coupled with that, the just financial burden, for lack of a better term, the district has on our two towns. We don't have much of a tax base, actually any tax base really, commercial tax base outside. So everything sort of goes to to the homeowners, right? And we've discussed at multiple points on how being in such close relations to a couple of very high-end private schools, we have a significantly large portion of students sort of going out of district, which is just an increased, again, lack of a better term, burden on our finances within town. So I would say sort of, just figuring out who we are, or not who we are, but who we want to be moving forward, and then sort of the cost implications that come with that are the two major things. Please jump in and correct me if I'm missing anything else, Michelle, Jean, Ty.
And could I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So the schools that students are going to, are these charter schools or are these independent schools?
These are independent. We are about 3 miles away from Landmark School.
Yeah.
And when
So more special education?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we've been trying to develop in town literacy-based programs, but there's still that very attractive draw to having them be that they're right next door. It's for some people in Wenham, it's closer to get to Landmark than it is to get to Hamilton Wenham High School. So it's not a burden that other towns would face, necessarily saying, well, you know what, I think my student will be fine in this high school, in the school system with these supports, because it's not, worth trying to get my student 40 miles to, a different school. This is I think a problem of proximity, which is unique to this district, and it is, really, really difficult from a financial standpoint on our.
Yeah. And one of the things I noticed as I was kind of going through some of the data on the DESE website is that the identification of special education, you're almost at 19%, which tends to be on the higher end of the continuum there. And one of the things that suggests to me is that what are the, what I would say tier 1 and tier 2 programs that are being built out? What's happening in the classroom, the tier 1 classroom level? What are the supports that we have in place? What are the strategies that are in place? And then the tier 2, a really robust intervention system, is one of the ways in which you can help to be able to support students prior to ever hitting an identification for special education. There are certainly students that need that identification and need that support, but when you start to see a 19% special education identification rate, that would be a question that I would ask. It's a very preliminary take, but just looking at some of the data, that's something that gets raised for me.
So okay.
I would say that what you've just said is what has kind of sort of been identified, that we have some of the work that started this year is a early literacy sort of investigation on what we're doing around that. Mm-hmm. And also we've started a team that is doing just looking at a few cases where the student ultimately ended up being placed out of district, and just to see where that broke down, because we don't really know where it broke down yet, so that we don't know exactly what needs to be fixed because we don't know what was broken. Yeah. So yeah, I think you've hit directly on that. One thing I would add that's been, or I don't know exactly how to say this, but our SOI sort of addresses the issue. We've had decreasing enrollment for several years. Part of that was self-created because we stopped accepting large numbers of choice students to our high school. And so we have a smaller population at our high school based on that decision-making process. But we have 3 elementary schools. The district just to the north of us, Ipswich, is almost the same amount of students. They have 2 elementary schools. They were looking at having 1. But so one of our issues is that we have 3 elementary schools that are about the same age. They're in the 60 to 70 year range. And we need to figure that out. And when you tell people that maybe we're going to close 1 or 2 of those schools and take them out of the neighborhoods, even though they're all within about a mile of each other, that becomes very entrenched. I mean, we're not talking about traveling 10 miles to another town. We're talking about literally 5 or 10 blocks to get from one school to another. So I think that's one of the critical issues that's going to need to be addressed, in addition to the fact that our high school is also relatively old. And there's limits in the size of the school classrooms, and that there's some programs that maybe we would want to have, but we can't because of space limitations. And then in addition to that, we attached our middle school to our high school. And when we did that, we lost a lot of land. So that means that we don't have land to provide athletic fields at our high school the way it would ideally be. And that has caused some of our athletic facilities to be run down or be completely unusable. So now we have to rent out a place for our tennis team to play. Our track team can no longer have home meets because the track has become so bad. So we have several things that are going to need to be addressed over the course of the next decade or so.
So a lot of capital planning needs for sure. And, you know, one of the things that you were talking about in terms of the elementary school, that is the Vermont problem right now, is that there are all these, and these schools are much smaller than the ones that you have in your district, but many single operating small schools, that financial model is incredibly expensive because you're paying for an additional principal, you're paying for an additional nurse. You can't combine as many students together in classrooms. So if you have for example, a group of students that you may have like a 12 in a classroom, but if you combine them in, let's say you might have like 13 in for Massachusetts numbers, which are different from Vermont. But if you have 13 or 14 students in a classroom, looking at combining those into or having two classrooms of 14 is a challenge. But if you had more sections, you can get those numbers spread out more evenly, and you don't need as much staff to be able to do that. And in a planning process for a new school, one of the things that you can look at is, you know, the attrition. If you know you're going to land there, you know you're going to ultimately need fewer teachers, which brings the number down, and you can start planning through attrition so you don't have to do anything in terms of layoff of staff and being really mindful of that. But operating a single larger school as opposed to 3 single elementary schools, or even 2 elementary schools. And I would guess that when you put your application into MSBA, they're probably going to raise that issue for you around whether or not that would be the wisest use of funds. So that's where you know, what we're talking about right now is the financial model that makes sense, that could provide you with additional resources to address things like your athletics and the other different needs that you have. But the other flip side to it that you alluded to is the community, culture, emotional attachment to their schools. And what does that look like in terms of bringing people together to start to understand the trade-offs that are being made? You know, if we keep this model, here's what we have to give up. And if we were able to come together and do a different model, here's ultimately what your students will gain over time as they go through the district. And so that community conversation, community engagement about trade-offs is the other part to it. The numbers, I don't think anybody will be shocked to find, work a lot better when you have schools that are merged, particularly because a couple of your elementary schools look to be relatively small in the 200, 250 range. So getting a single elementary school together around 500 is a reasonable, certainly, number that lots of places pull off well. So the finances of it are much, much stronger to go in that direction, but it can't be done unless you get community buy-in and they see how their student wins ultimately if a model like this is put into place.
We recently adopted a strategic blueprint that the leadership team presented to us. What is learning? You know, reimagine, especially moving forward, you know, in the 21st century. So I think as a school board, we would look to have a leadership that would, you know, move this blueprint forward and engage all parties and be supportive of the leadership team.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that has really drawn me to Hamilton Wenham. You know, you heard my opening statement. That is really something that I am passionate about as an educator. I am my personal beliefs about education are deeply aligned with what you have put forth in your blueprint. And I think that I've had the opportunity and the good fortune to work with a lot of leaders nationally that are working on this movement and looking at what teaching and learning needs to evolve to in order to be sure that our students are well prepared. So I sit on the Ed Leader 21 advisory board. I don't know if you know Ken Kay's work at all. I've worked closely with him on a number of different projects. We attend a national conference annually with communities across the country that are working on this. And had I had more bandwidth, there's a number of different groups across the country that we can connect to that help us learn from one another so that we can get smarter faster when we network with people that are also doing this kind of work.
Thank you.
Did you have another question?
Yes, I did have another question,
Okay.
if people would indulge me. So, I've been talking a lot about teams and how people work together, and I'm really curious at your leadership, your administrative leadership team, how you feel that that's functioning, how you feel the team of the board and the superintendent work together, and then how you feel the community leaders such as selectmen, town managers, that those groups, how do they work together? What's working well, and what are the team challenges that you see?
That's funny, because I was actually going to sort of bring up a question like that to you. I don't know where I want to. So I think this past week, Hamilton One was not unique in this situation, has shown a lot of holes in the armor for our district. And I think that there's a lot of areas for growth within our current leadership team as a result, right? It's something that we've been sort of concentrating on one thing for so long. We've been letting some other things sort of slide that haven't been directly in front of our face. Excuse me. And, one thing that sort of concerns me hiring a new superintendent, that, when you're hiring an interim, even though we knew that our interim could possibly make a good long-term superintendent, and will be in Melrose, will be a fantastic superintendent there. One thing that we weren't worried about is sort of, she was coming in to sort of just keep the wheels on and, excuse me, to streamline the process. She wasn't necessarily there to sort of bring everyone together. Not to say that she didn't, and she did a fantastic job in a lot of ways, but I think that in doing that, we realized that this is somebody else's team that was assembled, right? I think that became clear. This is a previous administration's team that, Dr. Harvey put together for over the course of 8 years. And so you're going to be walking into somebody else's team. There are great, great, great educators up and down within our district. That is the strongest part of our district. Not everyone, I can't promise you that everyone would be on board with you when you came in the door. So one thing I'm wondering is sort of how you would handle that. But I do think you have the structure of a very solid team here, but you need to win them over, and I'm sort of wondering what's going to happen, or how you would handle, when they're not there. I think I'll let sort of Jean or Michelle speak to the boards more. The towns are both still a little bit mad at me from last year, so I tend to look internal and let them look external. But that's sort of my thing right there, and sort of my question to you, tossing it back to you a little bit.
Sure. So I think the first thing that I would say is that team building falls under that important but not urgent category. And so sometimes that it doesn't get the attention because there are so many other things coming at people that are important and urgent. But much like don't listen to people who are sharing with you what could go wrong with your plan at your own peril, don't pay attention to team building at your own peril. And one of the things that, I am humbled to say is that in the response to the coronavirus in our district, there is nothing that has convinced me more about the power of teams and investing in those structures. We have been able to build out a remote learning, digital learning environment for students very, very quickly. We've been able to get a food delivery service up and running. We've been able to get childcare up and running, and that is only because of the remarkable teams I have the privilege to work with every day. So that's one piece that I would say around that. So how do you start building that? And there are different levels of team building. One is, confronting the cold, hard, brutal facts, what's working, what's not working. There needs to be an open conversation with that. I think before you get to that conversation, so that people are willing to be honest about what it is that is getting in the way, there is that trust building. Do we know and trust one another as human beings. So, for example, when I came to my current district, we started the first meeting at a cafe in the streets of Woodstock, and we all met for breakfast and coffee, and we just talked to one another as people. Who are we? And once, what I find is that once you start to know and recognize one another as a human being, those conversations and that trust building starts. So I think that that's a critical piece. Our leadership team does a summer retreat every year. We go off site. We spend a couple of days together. We have dinner together. We hang out together. We do an activity together. This is because that helps us to build that sense of we are a unit that works together and has one another's back. So that paying attention and looking at strategies that allow for that, I think are really critical. And there is the other side to that once that, as you're moving this team forward, getting to everybody to, you have to have things that we commit to as a group. What are the essential agreements that we have all decided that we are going to hold to? And that collective agreement, then there is that question, that the team is expecting you to hold to that collective agreement. And then sometimes, there is a situation in which there needs to be a conversation with somebody who feels, who is not able to hold to that collective agreement. And at that point, their approach is impacting the team's ability to move forward. Sometimes those difficult conversations need to be held as well, and that I would say is the superintendent's job to be looking at that. But for the vast majority of folks, and sometimes all of the folks, spending intentional time making sure that we're trusting one another as people. I host a Christmas party at my house every year. We all get together. We do the Yankee swap. And part of that is I really enjoy the people I work with and happy to do it. But part of it is that we're together. We're a unit. And I'll give you an example. The governor in Vermont announced that schools needed to close in 2 days. Here's all the things that we needed to do at 4:00 in the afternoon after a weekend of, all kinds of community members weighing in about what they think should happen. And we were waiting for direction. 4:00 Sunday afternoon. By 6:00 Sunday evening, I had my entire team at central office ready to plan, and we worked for 3.5 hours to make sure. People were driving 45 minutes. A couple people are so far away, zoomed in, but the entire team in incredibly amount of short notice showed up. And I think that that's a result of the work that we all know that we can trust one another, that we're all in this together, and that sense of collegiality is incredibly important. And if it's not there yet, I would tell you that my first step would be to spend a lot of time making sure that we get that built out very, very quickly, because anything that moves a district forward is going to require that solidarity of a team, and that team needs to know where it's going. I mean, that's the other aspect to it.
So I just wanted to take one quick second, because I just realized that could possibly be misconstrued. Our team, I think, has done a wonderful job this past week, and everyone's come together, put in probably 100 hours anyway of really getting our district ready. I meant the district as a whole sort of had all these holes in it. You know what I mean? Like, we just started really wow, we don't have the infrastructure. We can't be sure that, everyone has the capability of getting, laptops and Wi-Fi at home and what that means. So, while you will have probably individual problems, unfortunately, that's part of life. I just realized as I was going through this, I'm like, oh God, I don't want that to be misconstrued that this, we have a wonderful team. They are really the strength of this district.
I do. Thank you for clarifying that, because, certainly my interactions with folks, I had a chance to work with Vinny on the the online Zoom meetings and have interacted with a number of folks, and you do seem to have very strong people there. But sometimes you get really strong people and they're just not gelling well together, and that's so that's not a commentary on individual people, and that's part of this superintendent's role, I think, is to have individual people that have great talents figure out how they complement one another and support one another. But I would agree with you that the other, we're this experience that we're having over the past couple of weeks in terms of rollout really does help us to see where we're well prepared and where are some places where we're not there yet. And one of the things that has been interesting to me is that the ability to fill those holes under this state of emergency, things are changing and people are stepping forward and figuring it out in a way, in a very, very short time period that I think under different circumstances may have actually taken years to figure out.
Oh, I think exactly.
And so it's been, in terms of silver linings, one of the things that I've been really so pleased to see is the remarkable jumps that people are making in order to be responsive in this environment.
I would say the biggest challenge in our district with that particular issue is we're 2 towns. So we're like, so it's been, some people talk about it as being a dysfunctional marriage. Some people talk about it as an older sibling, younger sibling rivalry. That in the 25 years that I have lived here, we have had development of several regional programs, but there's always fighting about it. And so, even though many people will view us as one community, we really have 2 town structures that have different personalities. And then we also recently at the town level, Hamilton has had a new town manager for about 1.5 years, and Wenham has had a new town administrator for not quite a year. So at that level, even that level hasn't completely gelled yet. So, and then, we have the interim superintendent. So that part, it wasn't completely gelling yet. So that would be the first challenge you would need to kind of overcome, is how do you get the 3 of you to communicate and then have all of your boards communicate? This year we've done better on our end. Like our board has functioned better this year in communicating with our counterparts. And I'm not saying that the leadership hasn't done better at communicating either, because I think that has, but that'll be a challenge when you come in, that you're going to need to communicate and gel with that team that's also not a senior team coming in. So,
and what are the types of conversations that are occurring right now between selectmen, town manager, and board?
It's we only have had a couple of meetings jointly. A lot of times it's one-offs. We have a liaison with that, and a lot of times we talk to each other through public meetings and TV. So that's, which is not always the most effective thing, but we live in a small town, and we all know each other. We're all neighbors. So when you have that relationship, people are having informal conversations. When you don't have that relationship, we're not. So.
Yeah, and what are the biggest tensions that you're seeing between the various groups? I'm sure financial is one of them.
It's well, it's about budget, but it's also about that. Most of our schools are located in Hamilton. Only one school is located in Wenham. So if you were to consolidate elementary schools, how does Wenham get compensated for the money that they put into Hamilton? Hamilton feels that they could develop that land into tax-based land. So how come they don't get compensated for the same thing? So there's a lot of layers to it. And if you're selected, I'm sure we'll have a meeting and we'll talk all about it.
That sounds like one of those big, hairy, messy problems that you have to really watch to be sure that there's not that, who do we blame for this, right? But how do we stay focused on the problem?
Right, because nobody's
Yeah.
to blame.
Yeah, if I could just add to that. So I see a lot of challenges with politics, small p, and economics, right? Mostly driven by the fact that our constituencies and our missions are very different in some cases. And in some cases, they are all swimming in the same lane and whatever the metaphor is, right? Rowing in the same direction, right? Yeah. But ultimately, the school district, as you know, is there to help provide for the education of all students, right? And so our constituents really are the kids, the students, the parents, the staff and faculty, and all the other folks who interact with the schools. That's not entirely everybody in the towns, right? They have a very different kind of mission. They're there to provide services, for all residents in the towns. And so the economics of Hamilton and Wenham don't really help facilitate any of that conversation to be easy, right? Because as David mentioned, there is no commercial tax base in either two towns. So we're all really heavily reliant on a residential home taxes, right? And so any impact to any increase in the school budget or town services is really felt by everybody. And that puts a lot of pressure. And this is where the tensions, I think, sort of really fall in line, because no one's really going to say, we want to sacrifice this for that, right? We don't want to sacrifice fire protection for trash pickup. We don't want to sacrifice, the libraries for the athletic fields that the community uses. But it ends up being a very resource tight environment, right? And it's constrained because of all that. So that's why I say, like, the challenges that these two towns face is the politics and the economics, right? And what's interesting is that Hamilton and Wenham have a history of having joint services. We have a joint library, joint rec department, joint, obviously a regional school district. We had joint inspectional services. There was talk at some point of combining DPWs. That's, so there's a lot of effort and a lot of willingness, but it's still a very resource tight environment, regardless of whether or not the two towns combine or not. So that there's a lot of sort of that underlying. So the conversations you always get, that I always have with a lot of the board members, select board members and FinComs, have that sort of underlying tension. We're not visibly tense. Sometimes we can be because the resources are very tight, but there's an underlying tension of, we don't want to necessarily just give up what we think is best for our kids and our staff and our schools. Mm-hmm. So there's that.
Yeah, and I think this idea about how do you move a conversation so that schools become something that provides value to the community, right? So what happens to your property values when you have a high, in the Hamilton Wenham certainly has a very well respected school system and is recognized for sure. How do you maintain that and potentially even grow that so that the schools become values, the success of the school becomes a value to all of the communities. And some of that is around figuring out financial models or maybe making some difficult choices or some choices that are going to require a lot of processing to get to a place where you've got funding flexibility that's going to come as a result of freeing up some money so that you can continue to grow these schools and make them destination school districts. Other things that I think can be helpful there is in terms of community service, for example. How are the schools and our students giving back to the communities so that the communities see the schools as an institution that contributes to their well-being. In Shrewsbury, we had a community service challenge at the 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 high school level, each grade, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, had to put in so many community service hours. But what community members saw were our kids out there in the community contributing really valuable things, and that really helped to raise a level of buy-in around some of the work that was being done. In Windsor Central, we hosted an innovation and learning conference in conjunction with EdTech Teacher, which is a national organization. We filled the Winstock Inn. All local communities or businesses, benefited when we brought folks in from Canada, from primarily regional, but some people came from across the country. So how do when your district starts to get recognized as a destination district, what does that mean for community businesses? So I think one of the things to think about here is how does it become a win-win? Because if it just starts to become a conversation about fighting about limited resources, unlikely that that's going to end well.
So we've spent not quite 90 minutes, but more than we had intended. So we're super happy. But thank you for your patience as we learned the technology.
And thank you for your patience as well, as I was challenged with my screen sharing.
Yeah. So we would love to give you an opportunity to provide us with a closing statement.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. You've probably gotten a sense of how I see leadership and my work. Just to reiterate, I would say that this idea of hard on the issues, soft on the people is absolutely critical. That good, powerful things happen when you build good, strong teams that are working towards an agreed upon common objective. And that does not happen by accident. That is intentional work. And that this is a time in public education that in order for us to serve our kids and be sure that they are getting the types of opportunities that they need in order to be able to pursue the things that are important to them, we need to be thinking about what instruction looks like. And so in this environment of competing priorities, in needing to shift to what instruction looks like and how we deliver it, it requires a level of pulling together, and that is work that I enjoy doing. It is a work that I think I have a level of skill set in doing, and it's the kind of work that I think, when done well, feels really good to everybody. It feels good to the students, it feels good to the teachers, it feels good to the community. And if I would have the good fortune of being selected as your candidate, that would be something that I would jump right in and get going on. So thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time this morning, and best wishes with your decision.
Thank you. So
Thank you,
to
Mary
the
Beth.
school committee members, we are going to, I believe, stay on so that
Thank you, Superintendent Banios.
Yeah, you'd probably like me to leave now, right?
Well,
No, I'm just saying thank you.
we just have some administrative things we have to figure out who's doing what next week. So
no worries.
Yeah.
Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
okay. So does everybody, I'm seeing everybody in gallery view now. Is that good for everybody?
Yes.
So you know.
Yep.
Okay. So what do you want to talk about?
Well, so big thing at hand, 25% of our pool is now moving to Melrose, right? So that's something to consider. I think that, having Dr. Kuchenberger take that job, again, I as I said to you guys via text, I had encouraged her when I found out that she was a finalist that I think she should take, whatever was offered to her. I was hoping we would at least have the weekend to potentially counter, but that didn't happen. Excuse me. I think there's some things that we should be thinking about and looking at as a result of this. One being, I don't think if we had countered if we had chosen her to be our superintendent and countered, I don't think we would have won. And we have to sort of, I think, do some deep soul searching and figure out why that is. I think that every superintendent in this state and in the Northeast should be wanting to come to Hamilton Wenham. And if they don't, and we can lose to, now my niece and nephew live in Melrose. I lived in Melrose for 12 years. I actually have a very strong relationship to that community. But if we're losing superintendent candidates to Melrose, that's something that we have to look at internally. Why is that happening? Right? Again, as we're Hamilton Wenham, we should be getting the cream of the crop. Right? There's nothing we can do about timing. Right? This is something that we're sort of worried about. And, you know, here it is sort of happening. I know that Phil is also a finalist over at Bedford. I'm not sure when they're making their selection, but, you know, again, what happens if we both make offers and he goes to Bedford? What is that saying about us in our district? Right? So the other thing, and it just totally slipped my mind.
I think Dorothy had something she wanted to share.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure if I had a comment to make that I was not asking later to make it. So I'm okay at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. So Dorothy had shared that she had checked in or investigated that Melrose is planning to make their decision on Wednesday. What we don't know is if it's like a Wednesday night meeting or a Wednesday.
It's Thursday.
Oh, Thursday. Okay. So one thing I noticed Melrose did is they met like in the middle of the day. So you can make those decisions early in the day if you want to try and get ahead of somebody. So.
Wait, so you're saying Melrose hasn't publicly announced it yet?
No, they have announced it.
Okay.
Yes.
So like,
talking about Bedford?
Oh.
Michelle, or
yeah. I'm sorry. Bedford. Bedford is, yes.
Yeah. So Bedford is ahead of us, or it's kind of online with us. But what I noticed was Melrose made their decision during the middle of the day so that if anybody was trying to meet at night, like they got ahead of people by meeting, you know, they met more like at like 4:30, 5 o'clock. So,
to speak to sort of the other end of the same spectrum, right? I think it's important for us to make sure we are all comfortable with our selection, right? We don't want to be rushing because we want to try and beat out Bedford now, right? We don't, and if having these interviews, right, which I said to Michelle last night, if having these interviews via Zoom, which we all know is not ideal, does not leave you feeling comfortable, you know, with making the most important decision we can make. And we need to either sort of push out our decision to hopefully in a couple of weeks where we can meet these people face to face, or if we decide that, you know, we haven't found our dream candidate yet, that is our prerogative to make, and that is something that we should take very seriously. Right. And I want to make sure that that's in the back of everyone's mind. If you're not like, boom, this is it, then don't feel like you're forced to have to make a decision. Right. So
may I insert my, so I agree with what you're saying. At this point, you have 3 candidates that were all put forward by your screening committee that you were trusted to do that. I would encourage you at this point to continue the process.
I'm sorry. And again, I'm not saying that because I've actually really thoroughly enjoyed the process, really getting to meet everybody. You know, I just want to make sure that, you know, like I'm feeling more and more comfortable as it goes on. But I just wanted to make sure to put out to everybody, this is not something that has to be done Tuesday, right? If you're not, and I'm gonna value, you know, you and your opinion. If you're like, I'm stuck between these two, and I don't really want to make a decision yet because of any, you know, you are entitled to have that opinion, and I'm going to respect it for everybody.
Can I just?
Sorry, go, Michelle.
Oh, thanks, Stacy. I can just say, you know, being on the board for 11 months now, having gone through the interim search last year, that was rushed. And I felt uneasy about it. Where we are today in a pandemic world, and what we've done so far. And again, having the screening committee present us with 3 candidates and now going to site visits and having, the first interview with Mary Beth, I'm comfortable with where we are now, and hopefully it'll still be the same after we go through the 2 other interviews. And again, based on the screening committee and what we've done so far in this environment we're living in. So.
Yeah, and I don't think that I've hidden my admiration of Dr. Kuchenberger. I think she's done very challenging work for someone who's in an interim position this year, and put together a budget that's sort of like different than anything we've seen in this district in quite a while. So I was very disappointed that she took the job in Melrose, but I'm glad for her. But I feel completely comfortable that we're going to be able to move forward. And if we, I mean, I felt like that in some ways that this process has been better because we've had many more people able to jump in and out and participate in the site visits. And I think that's been a lot more personable because we've been going to people's homes really to meet with them. So it's been, I think, a good process.
Yeah, I think this isn't my first rodeo with superintendent searches.
Right.
So, I mean, we've had as Michelle Horgan said, yes, going to our interim superintendent search wasn't the most ideal. We got pushed into it. I think this process has gone very well. We've had, as far as we really want, I think, to move forward and make a decision after we hear all the interviews.
So can I just, there was a question about moving Phil's interview, and there's a logistical reason why we can't move it up to 6 o'clock. So keeping it at 7:30 or 7:15 or whatever it is probably the best plan, because he's going to need to get from, he was going to get from one place to another, but now he doesn't. But I still think just like it's fair to give someone a mental break. Having done site visits for 3 hours straight, like you need a physical and mental break between that and starting your interview.
And dinner.
And
right.
Possibly dinner and anything else. And so we also have Dan set up, I think it's 6, right?
Correct.
So should we give him that same opportunity and push that one back, or because he's going to be physically here?
Well, he's not. I would say he doesn't need to be physically there now, because that was predicated on him being there in person.
Yeah.
Fair to give him a break. I think your town clerk would tell you, open meeting law wise, you would just need to have someone there to open the meeting and recess until you're ready to start the interviews.
Yeah. So
so they could say, up to you. If you want to say, we'll give you, say, 6:37 instead, or leave Phil as he is and give Dan the opportunity for break. Absolutely. Either way, your prerogative.
Jane?
So Phil and Dan are both on the same day? Same night? No.
Monday and Tuesday.
Yep.
So Phil is on what night?
Tuesday.
No, Monday. Isn't Phil on Monday?
Phil's on Monday, Dan's on Tuesday.
Oh, sorry. I have it written down backwards.
I know where Gene's going. I think you have a good point.
No, because, and I'm going to...
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work because the whole idea was that they would have the opportunity to have their site visit before their interview.
Okay.
And Dan's site visit isn't going to take place until Tuesday.
Yeah.
Dan's site visit is not going to take place until Tuesday. Got it. Okay, because
I'm
hosting Phil. Because Vinny can't do it, so I'm hosting Phil on Monday.
Right.
Correct.
So Dan is on Monday. Phil is on Tuesday.
No, other way around.
Other way around.
Sorry. Got it. All
And
right.
I would prefer Monday, Phil, to be at 7:15 because of the drive. I have the longest day of drive on Monday. I would not, if it was 6 o'clock, I would not be able to attend at all because if I'm driving, I cannot be on a call. Probably I won't be there at 6. I have to drive probably 8.5 hours that day.
The last thing is that, Dorothy, today we got the raw data, I guess, if you want to call it.
Yep.
I would like to let everybody know it's completely anonymous. It says person number 1, person number 2, person number 3. Are you going to summarize that for us?
Well, I gave it to you that way because had they been in person, you would have gotten a lot of single sheets of paper.
Right.
So I was trying to give it to you in the same way you would normally get it. I can do it in the SurveyMonkey way, but I think, you're going to have to read through all the answers anyway.
Yeah, so it's going to be hard. So I almost feel like we might want to try and push Dan back a little bit so that we can get the SurveyMonkey information and read it.
Right.
Well, I want to read that before I make the decision. So if we're not going to make the decision on Tuesday, then that's fine. But if we are, then I want the opportunity to read that.
I will make sure you get it. But the other thing is, I thought you were all headed towards, you wanted to wait till Wednesday to make the decision anyway.
I think we are. But my question now is, it's too late to post, right? We have to keep it at the time it's at. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We have to keep it at the time it's at because it's too late to post. All right.
What, for Wednesday?
Yeah. What time is Wednesday posted for, David? Is it at 7?
6, I think.
6. Okay. All right.
I thought it was 6.
Okay.
I think
6.
it is 6.
Perfect. Okay.
I'm going off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure I had to go straight across the board at 6.
Great. That's what we'll do then.
So can I ask, because I wasn't part of any other last process, and I think I'm hearing that it felt a little bit rushed last time. Is that true?
So the last well, actually there's 2 things. One, we could change the time for Wednesday.
No.
Right?
No. Wednesday.
Wednesday. Yeah, Monday.
Yeah, we could.
Wednesday, we can make it earlier if we wanted to, because we can do it Monday. We can post it earlier, and
Sorry, Ty, I got you too.
suggest on Wednesday that we possibly post earlier.
So then I guess who can meet when? I'm free all day. So
Yeah, no, it's a question of, the only person we're trying to beat out is Bedford. I don't think Bedford is, so if Bedford's not decided until Thursday, we don't have to beat them out.
all right.
So if we do 6, it's fine. And everybody's trying to work still, so let's let the.
I'm fine with 6 too.
Is Phil or Dan the finalist in Bedford?
Phil.
Phil's okay.
So I was asking in relation to the last search, how did last search compare to this one in terms of as it feeling rushed?
Completely different. It was a completely different setup.
The last time we had 3 candidates.
Yeah.
And then all 3 of them for various reasons fell out of the picture. So then we had to go to another set of candidates.
Yeah.
And we were running out of time to get somebody picked. And so we interviewed them and kind of made the decision all in the same night. So it was.
Oh, okay.
So the other, Ty, the other part of that was because it was just for an interim, there was no community input. There was no screening committee.
Okay.
It was strictly interviews of the candidates by the school committee.
Okay.
Which is something you usually do when it's interim. You don't
Yeah.
go through the huge process, but because the first round fell apart, we were forced to go to a second round, and it felt like it just was not the best process for us. And, we felt a little lost.
The first round of candidates was your more traditional interim superintendents, retirees, things like that. Couple got hired elsewhere, then one there was a bit of a controversy around. So we went back to the table and actually pulled up the ones that we had tabled, not because they weren't great candidates, but because they weren't necessarily I'm just weird. Jean's face is disappearing on my screen. It's messing me up. But not because they weren't great candidates, but they weren't your traditional interim, right? Which is something I know we've heard in the process, as Julie was mentioned as a, potential finalist for the long-term superintendent. Like, oh, well, traditionally you don't, extend your interim. It's like, well, we knew that, and we knew, one, even before we knew any of the who any of the finalists were going to be. Or we're like, well, we will allow, if they're interested, for them to apply for the long-term superintendency. And then at the second, the second part of that is that our second round of people were all people that would have been great candidates for a long-term superintendent, which is a non-traditional thing, which I know threw everyone a bit of a shock in the process. But so, just to catch you up a little bit, that's the 30-second elevator version of it.
Okay. Because I guess if there's any feedback, for me, this process does not feel rushed.
So, and I'm not saying it is. There's just some, about the, being involved with seeing someone in face to face and sort of meeting them, getting their vibe, getting their persona, how they sort of interact with people that, I know I've discussed with a few of you offline, and that's a negative to this process. But the positive to this process is that, we've had site visits with all of us there, which would not have been able to happen, if, me and you are supposed to go to Georgetown on Wednesday, whereas there'll be 5 of us there now. We're going to get such a better insight to be able to have better conversations on Wednesday to say, well, here are strengths, here are weaknesses, and, and here's what I feel, here's what I heard the community saying, and, things like that. That is above and beyond what we could have expected, had we not done it this way. But what, all I'm saying is, and you're not, because I'm really starting to get a pretty decent feel myself. But if anyone doesn't feel as confident in the process, I want you to make sure that we're going to value your opinion in not feeling confident, right? And so I just want to make sure that that's just out there. Excuse me, in that, I mean, I guess we are sort of under the gun a little bit because of Bedford, but
not,
right,
also not,
right, yeah. And like I said, even last year we set the precedent, and we're like, well, this didn't work the first time. We could go back. And I'm not saying we're not respecting the process, but I'm just saying that it isn't be all end all, come Wednesday night. That there are ways to pivot and just continue on with this process should anyone not feel confident, right? And again, it's sort of letting you know that it's not like the weight of the world on your shoulders here, even though it's the most important things that could possibly happen to our children.
All right. So.
Yep, we good? Anyone else have anything else? Dorothy, you have anything for us?
No, I just clarify for me what time you would like Phil to start on Monday.
Phil is definitely at 7:15, right?
Oh, okay. So Dan on Tuesday. Sorry about that.
I think we still have that at 6.
Yeah, we still have that at 6.
I think Dan is at 6.
That's like a 30-minute break if he finishes on time. Do you want to do it more like at 6:30? And then we can still start the Zoom meeting at 6, right? But say, hi, we're all going to be 30 minutes late. So we'll see.
You just open the meeting and recess. That's all.
Yeah. Do you want to do that? I mean, I just feel like, I know, like from those site visits, like I'm exhausted after 3.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Are you kidding?
So it would be fair to give somebody a mental break.
Mm-hmm.
Let them stand up and walk around.
Yeah, I agree.
So 6:30.
Step outside.
Yeah, step outside, get some vitamin D, which we're all take vitamin D, by the way. Don't be vitamin D deficient.
Right.
I mean, give him a chance to social distance himself.
Right.
From himself.
From himself.
Right.
All right. So we'll start the meeting at 6, but it will actually
start the interview at 6:30. Okay,
Yeah,
I will let him know.
Awesome.
I will let him know.
If I'm not
in that vein, we could ask. Well, we can still just change the posting because it's on Tuesday. I was gonna say in that vein on 6:30, we could offer up the first 30 minutes for town officials to come in and talk about something, or they could, they wanted to fill the airways. I don't know how many people will be tuning in, but
We have a nice crowd of people here today.
I know.
We should start doing Zoom on all our meetings.
I know. Why isn't it like
agree.
every week?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope there's some change made. Yeah. So.
So, yeah, no, that's a little bright spot. But I also think that people are just dying for something to do right now. And even watching a school committee meeting is different from the daily change.
So this is a question for Stacy. So do we know how? So I think minutes of this are going to look something like interviewed the candidate, discussed details around proceeding in the superintendent search. And that's kind of what the minutes would say. Like do we know if Mahala's taken the minutes or how?
I actually spoke to Mahala earlier today and she's on it. If we can just make sure we get a recording of this, we'll get her right on top of that too. She's prioritizing the 18th, the minutes from the 18th.
Yeah, hopefully all goes well.
She's already got that to me, so I just she must be really bored or something because she's got the meet.
She said she's locking her kids in the other room. So.
She's got a lot of minutes to me, and I just have to review some of it. But I've given a lot of stuff to Janelle to post for our next meeting to approve.
Okay.
And I had already told her that the March 18th minutes that go to the SOI get done first. But now, as you've seen, there was on MASC announced that there's an extension on those SOIs. So those aren't as important.
Yeah, we'll get them done, get them in anyway, though, because we're ready to go if those minutes as soon as those minutes are approved.
Well, we have to also get some of the old minutes because those are a priority, David, because of the time it's been.
We're a little out of compliance.
Well, not for the SOI. Those don't worry about the SOI.
No, I had told her to put the SOI as a priority, so we had it for so we can approve it in time for the deadline. But now we have an extension, and so
right. And I'm saying that we'll just approve those minutes, and we don't need the extension because we're already done. So no reason to do that. And then now we'll push her back on those older minutes. To just get that all caught up.
Yeah, I've been talking. Yep, I'm on it.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to hit record when we shut this off. What that should do is generate a link to the assistant superintendent in an email. And then that link will be shared with HWCAM. And then HWCAM has to, convert the Zoom file to a TV file. So originally we had talked about televising these right away because that would have been televised live. Do we want this to go up as soon as they can, or do we want to hold it to Tuesday?
I thought we were going to hold all of these, like just so to keep the questions sort of
private.
Well, originally we couldn't because we weren't sure how we were going to allow the public access because we were going to meet in person. But now that we've met in Zoom, we've met that requirement. So my direction to Benny should be to tell Bill to hold until Tuesday
night. Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's going to piss anyone off.
I'm looking for Dorothy to go like this. Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. So that I'll include that in the email to Benny. So, all right, great.
Make a motion.
I move that we adjourn at 1:07.
Second.
That was Michelle Horgan seconded.
Yep.
So
Has to
Michelle
be
Bailey,
Yes.
Dean Lee,
Yes.
Ty Prima,
Yes.
Michelle Horgan,
Yes.
Stacy Metrick,
Yes.
Peter Walczyk,
Yes.
and David Polito is a yes. So have a great weekend, guys. I'll see you Monday.
I'd like to commend Peter for wearing a tie tonight or this morning.
I didn't even notice.
All right, I'm going to hit record here.
All right, guys.
Bye,
Have
everyone.
a good one. Stay safe.
Peace.